I never believed in ghosts. It wasn't just a casual disbelief, it was a core principle, a pillar of my rational, ordered world. I've always considered myself a man of logic, of tangible proof. Ghosts, spirits, the supernatural. To me, they were the modern equivalent of dragons and sea monsters, fanciful creations to explain the things we don't yet understand. They were a failure of imagination, not a glimpse into another realm. I found comfort in the concrete, the explainable, the scientifically verifiable. The universe was chaotic enough without adding spectral tenets to its list of variables. To me, they were just stories, campfire tales to explain creaky floorboards or a drafty window. A ghostly sigh wasn't a tormented soul, it was poor insulation. Phantom footsteps weren't a lingering presence, they were the natural settling of an old house's foundation. I was the guy who laughed at horror movies, the one who would lean over and whisper the logical explanation for the jump scare. I was always ready, with a well-reasoned, slightly smug explanation for things that go bump in the night. Loose shutter, air in the pipes, an animal in the attic. There was always an answer, and it was never, ever a ghost. My friends, particularly my old college roommate Liam, saw my steadfast skepticism not as a philosophy, but as a personal affront. To him, the world was full of mystery, and my refusal to acknowledge it was a dare. You can't just dismiss what thousands of people have experienced, he'd argue over beers, his voice full of genuine conviction. You just haven't seen it for yourself. The taunts became a running joke, then a serious proposition. That's how I ended up in front of Blackwood Manor one chilly October evening, the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves hanging in the air. A single, cold, heavy key in my hand. The challenge was simple, almost cliché. Spend one night from dusk till dawn, completely alone in the county's most notoriously haunted house. No friends to call for a premature pickup. No phone to distract me with games or scroll through social media. Just me and whatever collection of spooks and spirits supposedly roamed its halls. The prize? $100, which was insulting, and bragging rights, which were priceless. I accepted, of course, already composing the speech I'd give them in the morning, certain I'd walk out richer, vindicated, and with a fantastic story to mock them with for years to come. The stories about Blackwood Manor were legendary, woven into the very fabric of our town's history. The Blackwoods were titans of industry in the late 19th century, their wealth built on coal and steel. They built the manor as a monument to their success. Then, one autumn night in 1912, the entire family, Arthur, his wife Eleanor, and their two young children, Thomas and Clara, simply vanished. The official report said they left, but the locals knew better. An untouched dinner was left on the dining room table, the food cold, the wine poured. No note, no sign of a struggle, no bodies ever found. The legends that grew from that mystery were specific and chilling. They say Eleanor Blackwood, driven mad with grief over a lost heirloom, a silver locket given to her by Arthur, still wanders the upper floors, her weeping carried on the wind, and the dark, imposing shadow that many have claimed to see on the grand staircase. That's said to be Arthur himself, forever waiting for a business partner who betrayed him, his silent rage staining the very air. Some even claim to hear the faint ghostly laughter of children echoing from the abandoned nursery. Locals avoided it after dark, crossing the street to walk on the other side. Teenagers used it as a test of courage, daring each other to touch the front door, but no one ever accepted the challenge to stay the night, until me. I dismissed it all as macabre folklore, a town's ghost story embellished with each telling. I was going to be the one to inject some reason into the fantasy. I was going to prove them all wrong. As my friend's car disappeared down the winding lane, their nervous laughter fading into the chirping of crickets, the house loomed before me. It seemed bigger and more menacing than I remembered from the safety of the car. It didn't just occupy the space, it dominated it, swallowing the moonlight. The Gothic architecture, all sharp angles and severe lines, felt less like a home and more like a tomb. The windows, dark and lifeless, looked like vacant eyes staring out into the night, holding a century of secrets. For a fleeting moment, a cold knot of genuine unease tightened in my stomach. I considered backing out, chasing down the car and enduring the endless ridicule. But my pride, that stubborn, foolish shield, was stronger. It pushed me forward, one reluctant step at a time, up the cracking stone path. I shoved the key into the heavy oak door. It turned with a grating shriek of metal on metal, a sound that set my teeth on edge. The door swung inward on protesting hinges, releasing a gust of stale, cold air that smelled of dust, decay, and something else. Something faintly, cloyingly sweet, like long-dead flowers. I stepped inside. Before I could even reach for it, the door slammed shut behind me. It wasn't the gentle click of a latch, it was a deafening, concussive boom, followed by the sharp, final sound of a heavy bolt sliding into place. The sound echoed through the cavernous space, seeming to climb the walls and disappear into the oppressive darkness above. It felt less like a draft and more like a declaration, a final warning. I was alone, or so I thought. The night had just begun. Crossing the threshold of Blackwood Manor was like stepping into a sealed tomb. The air, stagnant for what must have been decades, was immediately suffocating. It was a physical presence, thick with the ghosts of a million forgotten moments. Inside, the air was thick with dust, not the fine layer you might find in a neglected attic, but a heavy, choking cloud that swirled in the beam of my flashlight like a galaxy of tiny dead stars. Each particle seemed to hold a memory, a fragment of the life that had abruptly ceased within these walls. And beneath the scent of decay and damp wood, there was something else, the faint, sour scent of old perfume. It was a cloying floral, the kind an elderly woman might wear. A scent that should have been elegant, but had curdled with time and sorrow into something deeply unsettling. But it was the silence that was most profound. It wasn't merely an absence of noise, it was a heavy, weighted blanket that smothered all sound. The silence pressed in, swallowing every sound, even the frantic beating of my own heart. It felt ancient and aware, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. My flashlight cut a nervous path through the gloom, revealing a grand foyer that spoke of forgotten wealth. A sweeping staircase, its mahogany spine, curved gracefully upwards into an impenetrable darkness. All around me, furniture was draped in white sheets, their contours hinting at grand pianos and elegant settees, now yellowed and stained with age. They stood motionless in the dark, like a congregation of silent ghosts, their heads bowed in perpetual mourning. I felt an almost irresistible urge to pull back a sheet, but some primal instinct held me back, a fear of what I might find beneath. I came here a skeptic, an investigative journalist ready to debunk the local legends of Blackwood Manor for a Halloween feature. To ground myself in that reality, I began a methodical tour of the ground floor, determined to prove to myself it was just an old house, a collection of wood, plaster, and sad memories. But the house seemed to resist my logic. Every step was answered by groaning floorboards, a chorus of complaints from a house that did not want to be disturbed. The living room's fireplace was a gaping black maw, cold and lifeless. Above the mantel, a portrait of a woman with severe dark eyes stared down at me. Eleanor Blackwood, I presumed. The townspeople said she'd lost her mind after her husband's death, that she still wandered these halls. Her painted eyes seemed to follow my every move, her expression a mixture of sorrow and accusation. I felt like an intruder, a trespasser on her private grief. In the formal dining room, a scene of eerie stillness awaited. The long mahogany table was still set for a dinner that never happened. 12 place settings of fine china, each coated in a thick film of grey dust. The silverware was tarnished black, the crystal glasses opaque with grime. It was a ghostly tableau, a moment frozen in time, the chairs slightly askew as if the guests had vanished into thin air mid-celebration. What catastrophic event had interrupted this final meal? The kitchen held the most unsettling discovery. Amidst the decay, a single delicate teacup sat on the counter, starkly out of place. It was bone china, with a pattern of faded roses. It looked as if someone had just left it there. As I leaned closer, my light caught the faint ghostly imprint of a lipstick stain on the rim. This wasn't an artifact from 50 years ago. This felt recent. This felt impossible. It was then that I felt it. A chill hung in the air, a pocket of intense cold right by the counter. It was a damp, penetrating cold, colder than the rest of the house, a cold that felt unnatural, like it was actively drawing the heat from my body. I could see my own breath misting in the flashlight beam. I told myself it was just a draft, a rational explanation, but my heart hammered against my ribs. I checked every window, every vent. They were all sealed shut, caked with years of dirt. There was no source for the cold. My bravado had completely evaporated. I retreated to the grand foyer and set up my sleeping bag near the front door. It was a conscious decision, a strategic placement born of a burgeoning fear. This was my escape route, my one path back to the sane, rational world. The rustle of the nylon fabric as I unrolled the bag sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. I tried to read, to lose myself in the comforting logic of a history book, but the words swam on the page. My senses were on high alert. Every creak of the settling house, every groan of the ancient timber made me jump. Was that the wind, or was it a footstep on the floor above? Was that the house settling, or a whisper just on the edge of my hearing? The confident skeptic who had walked in hours ago was already fading, being replaced by a primal, terrified animal. I checked my watch, the small, illuminated dial a tiny beacon of order in the overwhelming chaos. Only 9 p.m. A fresh wave of dread washed over me. The night had barely begun. I was a prisoner in this mausoleum of memories, with hours of darkness stretching before me like an eternity. It was going to be a long night. The first few hours inside Blackwood Manor were deceptively still. I'd set up my base of operations in the Grand Library, a cavernous room where moonlight struggled through grime-caked windows, illuminating swirling dust motes like tiny, restless spirits. The silence was profound, a heavy blanket that absorbed every sound. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, but a waiting one. I found myself listening to the groan of ancient timber, the sigh of the wind against the eaves, and tried to convince myself that this was all it would be, the natural complaints of a house surrendering to time. I almost managed to believe it. I sat back in a worn leather armchair, the chill of the upholstery seeping through my clothes, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For a moment, there was just me in the house, coexisting in the dark. I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. Maybe the stories were just that, stories. And that's when the house decided to introduce itself. It wasn't a creak or a groan. It was a sound that didn't belong, a soft but distinct tapping coming from the floor directly above me. It was methodical, patient, tap, tap, tap. The sound was delicate, almost like a fingernail on polished wood, yet it cut through the oppressive silence of the library like a razor. I froze, every muscle tensed. My gaze shot upwards to the ornate plaster ceiling, where shadows danced and deepened, playing tricks on the eye. I held my breath, straining to hear, praying it was just a loose shutter or a branch against a window pane. But the rhythm was too perfect, too intentional. It was a signal, an announcement. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady, unnerving rhythm from above. I grabbed my high-powered flashlight from the table beside me, its weight a small comfort in my trembling hand. I clicked it on, and a brilliant white beam sliced through the gloom, painting a circle of light on the ceiling. The instant the light hit the plaster, the tapping ceased. The silence that rushed back in was somehow more terrifying than the sound it replaced. I kept the beam fixed on the spot, scanning for any rational explanation. Water damage? A rodent trapped in the walls? Nothing. Just old plaster and shadows. I lowered the light, a nervous laugh catching in my throat. "Get a grip, Ryan," I muttered, the words sounding hollow and foolish. "It's an old house, that's all." But the house wasn't finished with me. The sound came again, but not from the ceiling. It was closer now, from the grand foyer just beyond the library doors. It wasn't tapping anymore. It was 3 slow, deliberate knocks on wood, solid, imperative, as if someone were rapping their knuckles on the banister at the top of the grand staircase, demanding entry, or summoning me. Against my better judgment, I found my voice. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking on the single word. "Is anybody there?" The question was swallowed by the immense volume of the house, then thrown back at me in a series of decaying echoes that seemed to mock my intrusion. "Hello? Hello? Hello?" The silence that followed was absolute. No reply, no further sound, just the lingering ghost of my own voice. That's when the cold knot of fear in my stomach, which had been slowly forming, tightened into a fist of ice. Every rational explanation evaporated. This wasn't the wind rattling a loose frame. It wasn't the groaning of old pipes. This was different. This was intelligent. And then, a new sound began, weaving itself out of the silence. Whispers. At first, they were barely audible, a faint sibilant hiss at the very edge of my hearing, like a radio playing in a distant room, the signal lost in static. I couldn't make out words, just the cadence of speech, a hushed and urgent conversation meant for ears other than mine. A morbid curiosity, stronger than my fear, pulled me to my feet. I had to know. My own footsteps were deafening on the old floorboards as I crept out of the library and into the cavernous foyer, my flashlight beam dancing nervously ahead of me. As I moved closer to the base of the grand staircase, the whispers grew in volume and clarity. They seemed to be coming from the top of the stairs, from the shadowed landing that led to the second floor. It wasn't one voice, but several, overlapping, intertwining, a tapestry of secrets. I stood frozen at the foot of the stairs, my light aimed at the oppressive darkness of the landing above. The cacophony of whispers suddenly fell silent, and in that void, a single voice emerged, cutting through the silence with chilling precision. It was a woman's voice, soft and breathy, yet it felt as if she were standing right beside my ear, and it spoke a single word, my name, Ryan. The sound of it, in that place from that voice, was a physical blow. A torrent of ice-cold water surged through my veins, extinguishing every last ember of bravery. I recoiled violently, stumbling backward, my heel catching on the edge of a rug. I fell hard against a console table, the impact rattling my teeth. My mind reeled, grappling with the impossible. It wasn't just a random haunting. It was personal. It knew me. How? How could it possibly know my name? As if in answer to my unspoken question, the very air in the foyer grew heavy and cold. The change was instantaneous and dramatic. The temperature plummeted, a deep, penetrating chill that had nothing to do with the autumn night outside. It felt ancient, like the cold of a tomb. I pushed myself up, my own breathing ragged and harsh, and I saw it in the beam of my flashlight, my breath pluming in front of my face in a thick white cloud. And with the cold came a scent. It was faint at first, then it swelled, becoming utterly overwhelming. A sweet, cloying perfume of lavender and roses, the kind my grandmother used to wear. It was a scent of memory, of life, but here in the dead air of Blackwood Manor it was grotesque. It was the perfume of a ghost. The last vestiges of my skepticism shattered into a million pieces. The creaks, the taps, the whispers, the cold, the scent. They weren't random occurrences, they were a message. The house wasn't just settling, it was awake. It was aware, and it was speaking directly to me. And in that moment, huddled in the suffocating dark, I understood a new definition of fear. Panic took over. I grabbed my backpack and lunged for the door. It wouldn't budge. The house was holding me captive. A floorboard creaked above. I looked up, flashlight shaking. At the top of the stairs stood a figure, tall, impossibly thin, a silhouette of pure black. It had no face, no features, just a void. It glided down the stairs, bringing a wave of cold that drained the life from me. I was frozen, unable to scream. The shadow reached the bottom, only feet away. I pressed against the door, desperate. It raised a long, wavering arm and reached for me. I squeezed my eyes shut. I felt a touch on my shoulder, so cold it burned. It was the touch of something dead and full of rage. That icy touch jolted me into action. I threw myself against the door, once, twice, 3 times. The lock gave way. I tumbled onto the porch and ran, never looking back. I didn't care about the money or my things, just getting away. I ran until I collapsed on the roadside, shaking as dawn broke. Glancing back, I thought I saw a dark shape in the attic window. I never told my friends the truth. I let them tease me and paid up. How do you explain a shadow that moves, a voice that knows your name, a touch like death? Years later, I still hear that whisper sometimes, calling my name from the darkness. Ryan. If you enjoys my story, please remember to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment and like this video.